If you don't know me, my name is Amy Dabbs with Clemson Extension. I'm the School and Community Gardening Coordinator, and it's my pleasure to kick off the Food Literacy Summer Author Series today. Sorry, Ben, I didn't mean to jump the gun. Just in case you have any issues with Zoom, or this might be like not a Zoom Pro yet. You can unmute and control your camera down on the bottom. You can see all the participants and you can add your questions to the chat. But I think most of us are pretty close to being professionals at Zoom by now, since we've been doing it for almost a solid year or longer. So anyway, welcome. So it's my pleasure today to introduce you to our panel of speakers in order of appearance. First, we're going to hear from Ben Cease, who's the director of South Carolina Department of Education's Farm to School program. He's going to tell you a little bit more about that in a second. Then you are going to hear from Anderson. Oh, well, I've already introduced myself. Then you're going to hear from Anderson Cook. She is the statewide initiatives coordinator for the South Carolina State Library, and she's going to share some information about her program, Read, Eat, Grow. Next, we're going to hear from Philip Lee, co-founder of Readers to Eaters, who is going to introduce us to our guest speaker today, which is award-winning author Catherine Pryor. So I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to ask Ben. I'm going to pin Ben. I'm going to ask him to unmute, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you, Amy. Again, if see a lot of familiar faces out there on the chat board, so thanks for joining us, people I know and new people. So again, my name is Ben Cease. I work for the South Carolina Department of Education Farm to School program. South Carolina Farm to School is very proud to sponsor this year's Readers to Eaters Food Literacy Summer Author Series. And we're very excited to welcome our panel of speakers today. This type of program directly supports our mission, which is to facilitate communication, education, and opportunities for farmers, distributors, and schools to support healthy, locally produced food throughout South Carolina. Food literacy is the understanding of how our food choices impact our health, environment, and economy. And these choices are built into the core elements of our programming. The elements are procurement of local foods to be served in school meals, promoting educational activities related to agriculture, food, health, and nutrition, as well as creating hands-on learning experiences through school gardening. By enhancing food purchasing and education practices at schools and education sites, children and their families are empowered to make informed food choices. This helps strengthen the local economy while also contributing to vibrant communities. South Carolina Farm to School supports these core elements through a variety of initiatives like the School Garden Assistance Program, Junior Chef Competition, Summer Food Service Challenge, and we continue to look for other ways to facilitate these and other important connections. We recognize the significance of food literacy, and we're pleased to sponsor this summer author series that will help students connect to healthy food through literature. So thank you all for joining us, and I'm going to turn it back over to Amy, and I hope you enjoy the presentations.
Thank you, Ben. All right, let me switch gears here just 1 second, and I'm going to pin our spotlight, our next speaker, which is Anderson Cook. She's with the South Carolina State Library. She does a big job, a lot of work. She's the statewide initiatives coordinator at the South Carolina State Library. And South Carolina Read, Eat, Grow is an initiative started by the library in an effort to increase information regarding and about access to healthy food. And she's here to tell us all about it. So thank you so much for joining us.
Absolutely, Amy. Thank you for having me. Make sure you can hear me. Okay, sounds good. So yes, as Amy mentioned, I want to talk a little bit about Read, Eat, Grow, also known as REG or REG, depending on how you want to refer to it. So the goals of this program are to provide as many access points and opportunities as possible for community members to learn about food literacy as well as health literacy. And one of the first projects that we did was actually a pilot called SC Plants the Seed. And at these events, we would bring together nutrition educators and local farmers to come to the public library so they had an opportunity to sell their produce and offer food demonstrations with that fresh produce. And as part of an LSTA grant, we actually were able to also offer book giveaways featuring books by Catherine and Philip. So I'm so glad to see you guys on the call today. And the goal of that was to help build children's home libraries, especially home libraries around healthy food practices and healthy eating. And so in 2018, we purchased our first Charlie cart that public libraries could check out directly from us. And if you have not heard of Charlie carts before, they are essentially mobile kitchens, and they have appliances like induction stove tops and a convection oven, a blender, class sets of utensils, and even a gray water sink. And they're pretty substantial pieces of equipment. And they also come with a curriculum and activities that are broken down by age level and season, which is a really great resource for libraries that were planning programs. We had so many requests for this Charlie cart that we ended up actually buying a second Charlie cart. And then because we still had too many people that wanted to use these resources, we developed what we called kitchen in a box kits. And these had many of the same supplies and resources that the Charlie carts had, but were a lot more portable and easier to move around and circulate within the state. And so this past year, we actually applied for and received a grant from the Network of the National Library of Medicine, NNLM, and we were able to offer kitchen in a box kits to 13 of our counties directly, which allowed them to do monthly programs and on an ongoing basis without having to check out the kitchen in a box kits from us. And prior to the pandemic, libraries were, of course, offering programs in person, and they were doing things like community gardens and seed libraries, and of course, program demonstrations and food demonstrations. And then during the pandemic, our librarians pivoted to providing a lot of these cooking demonstrations online, and I do have links to that, so I will share both of those in a little bit. And I know that probably some of you are thinking, Anderson, libraries are book houses with grumpy cardigan-wearing ladies who just tell people to be quiet. And I just want to tell you that no, that is not what libraries do. We are community centerpieces, and we have all kinds of resources. And the function of libraries is to support our communities however we can. So I want to really encourage you, if you've not reached out to your local public library, please do that. See what they're offering, see about ways that you can partner, and see about ways that you can grow your community together. And so I have a LibGuide that we created, which has some program ideas and other book recommendations that you can reference, as well as the YouTube videos. So hopefully those will be some resources that you can use. And unless you have any questions, I want to go ahead and send it back to Amy. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Great job. All right, I'm going to switch gears. I'm so excited to check out that link that you just shared with us. That's great. And please, if anybody has questions for our speakers, make sure you drop those in the chat. And then if they can't answer it, right then and there, then we'll circle back at the end. I think we're going to have plenty of time to get everyone's questions answered and ready to roll. So all right, well, switching gears again, I want to introduce you to Philip Lee. Readers to Eaters publishes books that give a fresh and fun perspective on what we eat and how we eat through good stories, beautiful writing, and a deep appreciation for food and its cultures. So I want to just welcome its founder, Readers to Eaters founder, Philip Lee, and his big smiling face. So happy to see you again.
Hey everybody, great to be here. Thanks, Amy. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you, Ben, for hosting for sponsoring the event. We've had such a great time working with everybody. all of South Carolina, planning, working all these different great programs, and especially being part of the Summer Author Series. So like Amy says, I'm Philip Lee. I'm the co-founder of Readers to Eaters. I co-founded a company with my wife just about a dozen years ago, and I'm here in San Francisco, but we started a company back in Seattle. So we started a company, Readers to Eaters, especially with a specific focus promoting food literacy, to promote stories and about our diverse food cultures. So of course we publish stories about food, but more importantly, we tell stories about food. And so there's stories that often involves cooking and nutrition, but not exclusively. We want to tell stories about people. We tell stories people who grow it, cook it, share it, provide it. And so that's really what we want. We want to engage kids through stories about people and the food connection. And we tell stories about food in different ways, because we want kids to understand how food, impact their bodies, so like what, certainly in terms of what they eat, but also how food impact their communities. And we take the same book even to older kids and say how it impacts our environment, how it can change, create by growing food. Sometimes you can create jobs, you can create, all kinds of change in your community, ultimately making a better community through food. So that's really kind of our focus on how we tell stories. Another thing more immediate when we talk about food is that we want to get kids to think about food beyond yuck and yum. We want them to think about food in terms of taste and flavor. So when you want to try something new, what is it? Not just how it tastes like, but how does it smell like? How does it touch? I mean, how does it feel? And so in terms of the sensory side, and what we find is that it often gets kids a little bit more curious about what they eat when you think about all the senses, another thing to also get them to think about is the flavor. Is rather, again, like, because rather than just they don't like it, is it yuck or yum, but is it salty, sweet, sour, bitter, even umami, and by having more vocabulary about the food, we think that they can start to appreciate the food more, and also actually learn about other cultures, because different cultures start having different emphasis on all these different flavors. So I grew up, I'm Chinese and I eat bitter lemons, and kids often think like bitter is not good, but again, I find bitter lemon, really flavorful. But in addition to that, we also get kids to think about chocolate, and even sometimes if they're allowed to drink coffee, that has a little bit of bitterness to it, and it's just like kind of breaking down those kind of connections. Like, no, I don't want that, and to getting kids to think about the food in new ways is really fun, and so that's kind of stories and focus we try to tell. But Readers to Eaters also describes our partnership program. So we, I'm so happy to have Anderson here talking about the libraries, because of course, as a publisher, libraries are our friends, but in addition to books, libraries are now becoming food hubs. So we go to the reader side, and we work with a lot of libraries, across the country, and a lot of literacy organizations, and remind them how they, and work with them in terms of how they are becoming part of the food community. Of course, libraries, like Anderson gave these great examples, like already have books, like hosting community gardens, seed exchange, Charlie Card, but also, many libraries are physically feeding kids, with their summer meal programs that's going on now, and not just a few, but tens of thousands of kids. Here in the West Coast, I'm working very closely with in California and Washington State, and these are very, very big programs where they feed tens of thousands of kids, and so they are also kind of including our books now to use as a way to connect summer reading programs to summer meal programs, for example. But we also take our book to the eater side. We work a lot of food organizations, such as the farmers markets, and they have traditionally do a lot of nutrition education, but mostly through cooking demonstrations. And so now with our books, they're able to promote literacy and reading at the same time as their focus on nutrition education. And one great example is using organizations such as Wake and Snap Ed, and they're using a lot of our books as a way to introduce, and they really traditionally have not used books as a tool before to promote nutrition education. And the books, in fact, one of the most popular books that they use in Wake and Snap Ed are Kathy Pryor's book, Sylvia Spinach, and Zora Zucchini. So I'll jump to so you hear more about her books shortly. But I just want to just share a little bit about how I work as a publisher with our authors. Most publishers, and I think most authors, submit stories to their publishers and try to get them considered, and then we choose books to publish. In this case, I met Catherine Pryor sitting next to each other at a food bank. Yeah, I was giving away fresh vegetables at the food bank, and she's at the next table giving away plant starch. And I was like, "What are you doing there? What is that?" And that really started our whole conversation, getting to know Catherine. And very quickly, I learned that she's really a food advocate. Like, she does a lot of healthy cooking education, working with kids, organizations, and so on. And so we quickly became good friends. And then along the way, I also realized that she's a storyteller, and she has ideas about children's books. And so it's just a joy. And I quickly snatch her and say, please, let's talk. How can we work together? And so I want you to hear more about her stories, but it's such a joy and pleasure to have Catherine Pryor here. It's really one of my very first authors at Readers to Eaters. And so I want to pass that along, and you hear more about Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. All right. So, Catherine, if you want to, I'm going to pin you, and if you want to share your screen when you're ready. We're so excited to have you. While you're doing that.
It's so fun to be on the panel with Philip, because I haven't actually got to see him in a very long time, but we did work so incredibly closely on these books that, yeah, it's really fun. Okay. Well, thank you again so much for inviting me. I think my favorite thing about these very strange times is that I've had a chance to visit with people and organizations from across the country and the world that I probably wouldn't otherwise have had a chance to connect with. And so I'm loving hearing about all of the work that's happening there. And I think one of the things I'm hoping with this talk today is you'll learn I'm a big fan of collaborations and building partnerships to expand reach. And so I'm really hoping that I'm going to tell a lot of pretty personal stories. And I hope that maybe it sparks some ideas on things that you could do in your community, at your school. To just start thinking about how we connect more kids with more books and great food and have fun in the gardens. So a little bit about me, why I'm so drawn to books. I was a kid who just absolutely loved books. I devoured books. I loved reading. I loved writing. And I spent a good chunk of my 20s trying to be a novelist. But when I got tired of waiting tables and bartending, I decided it was time to go to grad school to study something else. And I ended up studying sustainable food and farming systems, and really loved that work. I landed a great job with an organization called Healthcare Without Harm, where I was running a statewide program asking hospitals to use their purchasing power to bring in more local sustainable foods for their cafeterias and patient meals. As Philip mentioned, my husband and I started a program with a food bank in South Seattle where we were growing organic vegetable plant starts for food bank clients so that they could grow food at home during the growing season here. And we were just kind of surrounded by food and had all this great work happening. But I really felt personally like something was missing. And I realized that something was writing when I got it. I kind of turned my back on it after I decided novels weren't happening for me. And I missed it. And so I started waking up an hour before I needed to go to wake up every day. And I would just write for fun. I would just, write in a journal. I would do writing prompts. I just sort of rediscovered the fun of writing again. And then there was one day I was in our state capitol in Olympia advocating for farm to school funding. And a dad told a story of how his daughter wouldn't eat spinach until she grew it in her school garden. And after that, she couldn't eat enough spinach. She wanted it in everything. And all of the other advocates in the room with me were sort of like, oh, that's, we should write a white paper about that. Can we do a press release about that? And I, for whatever reason, said, that would make a great children's book. And I didn't know anything about writing children's books. So I took a class at our local community college, learned how to write children's books, and came up with a draft of Sylvia's Spinach, which my friend Philip Lee, I knew had been in publishing in New York. And so I sent him a draft of it, asking if he would give me some feedback. Unbeknownst to me, he was getting ready to start Readers to Eaters. And so they were looking for a book about school gardens, and asked to publish it. So, you don't say no when life hands you something like that. And so very quickly, we were able to get Sylvia's Spinach printed, found a fabulous illustrator. And then I had a summer where I was growing. I ended up signing up for 2 community garden plots. It was way too much food for me. And I had all of these leftover squash plants from the food bank program we were doing. And so I planted them in a community garden, and I ended up with just a absurd amount of zucchini and squash. And one night I had a dream about a little girl who was going up and down her block, handing out zucchini from a little red wagon. And I woke up, it was 4 a.m. I sat on my front porch in my pajamas, and I wrote the first draft of Zora's Zucchini. And so pretty quickly, I realized that there was a real desire for books like this, and that I, for whatever reason, really, really loved connecting with people about it. And I think part of that is I've always been very drawn to working with food and gardens, because I feel like food and gardens are an area where you can make an immediate, long-lasting, positive impact on people's lives. And they're fun. And I just made sure that I had fun with it. So I would do things like, I had this little red wagon that I planted with spinach that I would take to school visits. I would take it to bookstores, and I would just let kids pick spinach right out of the little red wagon. I read books, on hay bales in the back of pickup trucks, on farms. I just had fun with it. And I kind of met the kids where they were. And I realized that parents and educators were really looking for more books about food. But then I also realized that both nutrition advocacy groups and literacy groups were starting to use the books as outreach tools. I realized that I was in a really interesting position to bridge that gap. And a big part of that has to do with how I grew up. My mom was a single mother until I was about 5 years old. She had grown up really poor, like dirt floor poor, and had been hospitalized for malnutrition several times as a child. And there was no way she was going to let that happen to me. She was a nurse. She's retired now. She was a nurse, but she was with me during the week, and she would work double shifts on the weekends when my dad could watch me. So it still wasn't quite enough to cover our living expenses. And she relied on food assistance programs like food stamps and WIC. And, it's funny because looking back at that, I don't remember ever being hungry as a kid. And so I, for the rest of my life, will be grateful to these programs that helped our family when we needed it. Me and my sisters grew up healthy with no major health problems, and have all gone on to have interesting, helpful careers. So I feel like we were a pretty good investment. But I always want to make sure that I pay that forward. I will never stop being grateful for it. And then another thing, sort of around this same time, that was a very foundational memory for me. When I was about 6 years old, my mom and my stepdad and their friends rented a backhoe, and they transformed an empty lot near our apartment into a community garden. And it's funny because as an adult, I was asking them, I was like, how did that community garden come about? And they were like, oh, we rented a backhoe. We saw it and we were like, that should be growing food. So it's I don't remember them building it, but I remember being a kid and running around this amazing community garden. Me and my friends would just kind of run from plot to plot, like picking and eating and grazing. And it's one of the first memories I have of feeling both empowered and absolutely free. And their memories associated with like the taste of green beans and cherry tomatoes. And it's incredibly foundational. So I think that's part of the reason that I have been drawn to food. I really want to help kids nurture this foundational love that you can have if you introduce them to good food and gardens at a young age. And so the other thing, one thing I really try to do now, I just say yes to good ideas and I figure out the details later. I have a feeling a lot of people who work in this arena kind of end up with that approach. But this is a picture of me at a farmer's market in Spokane with some folks from Catholic Charities of Spokane and the director of the Washington State Farmers Market Association, where we were advancing a really innovative program that Catholic Charities of Spokane came up with. I had heard that people at farmers markets around the country were using Sylvia spinach just for story time at the farmers market and thought it was really cool. But then I found out there was this group in Spokane that was trying to do a book giveaway to get more families to use their SNAP benefits at farmers markets. And they were specifically looking to get more families to participate in something called Fresh Bucks, which is a regional program. I think other states use different terminology. But Fresh Bucks is basically a matching program. Like someone can take their SNAP card to the market manager and they get a token or a paper or something, which gives them, money to spend with the vendors at the market. And then oftentimes with Fresh Bucks specifically, there was a matching program. So you actually had an incentive, like you could say, I want $10, but you would actually get like $15 worth of tokens or whatever. And it's an incredible program. The farmers markets really wanted it to do well, but they were having a hard time attracting enough participants. So Catholic Charities of Spokane has a program called Food for All that runs a couple farmers markets, and they were interested in trying a new approach to attract more families to use their program. One of the schools that they manage, or one of the markets they manage, happens to be right next door to an elementary school. And so they were like, well, let's try this giveaway program. And they worked out a deal with Readers to Eaters to buy, I think it was like 200 books at a deep discount. They brought me to Spokane and we did a book giveaway. I did an author visit and I would do like all the kindergartners, all the first graders, all the second graders in the auditorium. And at the end of each presentation, I was like, you're all getting a free book today. I call it my Oprah moment. So giving away free books is just the best feeling. But in each of those books, Catholic Charities of Spokane had stuffed, they had done like flyers about the program. They had done a survey that families could fill out to get another free book at the market that day. And every time I did my presentation, I mentioned that they could bring the kids who were using, whose families relied on that, could bring that to the farmer's market, bring their parents to the farmer's market to get another free book. And it actually was a program that went really, really well. Catholic Charities of Spokane started bringing me back every fall to increase participation because their data showed that more families were using SNAP at the farmer's market if they knew they were going to get a free book. Or sometimes it was just because their kid came home from school and told them that they could use their card and get Fresh Bucks at the market. So I was hooked. I wanted to do more. I loved this program. And so I applied for an Artist Trust Grant, which is a Washington State Artist Grant, to expand the program. And I partnered with the Washington State Farmers Market Association. So I had them select 3 farmers markets around the state that they were wanting to increase the SNAP participation in. And then they found like a coordinating elementary school nearby that I could do an author visit and we could do a book giveaway. So the Washington State Farmers Market Association would buy all the books, and then the Artist Trust Grant covered my time and travel. And we were able to give away about 1,000 books that fall, which was really wonderful. There was one interaction from that experience that has stuck with me and I will never forget. There was a little girl who, I had finished the presentation, all the kids had like lined up and were getting their free book. And there was a little girl who took the book from me and walked away. And then she kind of like circled back and she held it up and she was like, is this mine to take home? And I was like, yeah, it's a gift. It's yours to take home. And she lifted it to her nose and she smelled it. And she said, it smells good. And I was like, yeah, I really like the smell of new books too. And it didn't occur to me until later that she might have been so taken with it because it might have been the first time that someone had given her a new book. And we know that there is a direct link between access to food and access to books. And some numbers from the Children's Literacy Foundation are that 61% of low-income families have no age-appropriate books in their homes, and that while children from middle-income homes have on average of 13 books per child, there's only one book for every 300 children in low-income neighborhoods. And so one of the reasons I get so excited when I see anti-hunger nutrition advocates partnering with literacy advocates is because there are many ways to feed a child. And when you can do food and books, you're feeding them in multiple ways. And so I will just say too, I want to make a plug here before I move on to the next bit about the power of bulk purchasing. So those of you who work in institutions know what I'm talking about. But basically, I want to just talk for a minute about the power that it gives you the more books that you buy. So an example I like to use are the Spanish editions of Sylvia's Spinach, Glare, and Zora's Zucchini. So for years, I had been getting requests from organizations asking for the books in Spanish, but Readers to Eaters couldn't do it because they couldn't make a business case for it. They're small business, they're family-owned business. They could not afford the cost of translation without the guarantee that they would be able to sell enough copies to cover those costs. So then we ended up getting reached out to from the Washington State WIC office and the Wisconsin State WIC office that they were interested in doing book giveaways with their clients, but they would only do it if the book was also available in Spanish. And so Philip and the WIC offices were able to negotiate the size of the purchase of books in Spanish that it would take for them to be able to afford the translation costs. And it was absolutely amazing. I mean, Washington State, I think they took like 5,000 in English and 7,000 in Spanish, and Wisconsin took like 20-some thousand in English and like 5,000 in Spanish. And that was what it took. And now the books are available in Spanish for anybody who wants it, which feels absolutely amazing. I will also say that when you buy books in bulk, and it doesn't have to be mine, I'm just using this as an example because this is my personal experience, you can dramatically reduce the price of those books and increase your influence. You might be able to make some really specific requests that you otherwise might not if you were just buying them through a conventional channel. So one thing I'll say is that if you're an organization that's thinking about doing this, you might look at pooling orders with another organization to see, you might be able to reduce your cost if you're able to guarantee a certain size purchase. We'll also say I'm not getting rich off of this. Royalties are based on the price of the book. And so the less the cost, anyway, I had a day job until I lost all my childcare in the pandemic. So definitely not getting rich off of this, but I love the idea that kids who grew up like me, WIC kids, are able to increase the number of books in their home because I can only, I can really relate to how much that would have meant to me as a kid. So yeah, I just wanted to talk for a minute about the power of buying in bulk and the opportunities for that. So if you are buying books, I loved hearing about the grant that Anderson had. I thought that was so cool. I mean, there's just so many ways to go about this. One, I mentioned the artist grants for local authors. So if there's an author in your area that has a food book, has a garden book, it might be interesting to reach out to them, see if they've tried applying for artist grants. I've won total of 3 grants to do this, 2 at the county level and 1 at the state level. And they were all grants ranging from like $2,500 to $7,000 to do these programs. So they're not huge, but it's enough that, authors are self-employed. And so it helps them cover the cost of their time and travel, which is huge. I will also say another thing to think about is partnering with farmers markets. Obviously, every farmers market is different at a regional level, but some of them do have all of these book funds available through SNAP-Ed. And so that might be an opportunity to collaborate on some book giveaways. Partnering with literacy organizations can be really impactful. Philip knows more about that and could probably share specific names of literacy organizations because I know that they work with them a lot. I think some of the ones that pop out to me are like Jumpstart and First Book. They do some good ones, but then there's also super regional literacy organizations. There was a garden that I worked with in a school that I went to in Olympia, where their garden is actually across the street from their school. It's at a church that has donated their land to be a school garden. And so the different classes, one day a week, walk across the street. And I happened to be there on a Friday. And every Friday, the kids walk across the street to the garden. They have their garden education. And then there was a local literacy organization that set up a table with free books, and they were used books. They weren't gorgeous, shiny things, but they had selected a variety of used kids books, and every kid who visited the garden that day got to go home with a book for the weekend that, while it wasn't new, was new to them. So there can be some really fantastic organizations in your area that are just wanting to connect books with kids however they can. And then the last thing I'll say is working with local philanthropists. So that was actually how the program with Catholic Charities at Spokane happened. They had a funder who loved the Food for All program and they just wanted a concrete thing that they could donate for. And also the manager of the Food for All program knew that if he could keep coming up with good ideas for outreach and stuff like that, they could keep this funder engaged. And so every year they were able to tell this specific funder, like, these are the numbers we got from the book giveaway that you funded last year. And the funder liked it. And so they kept writing checks. And so having a really concrete thing that you can ask if you have a donor who wants to be engaged, that can be a pretty incredible way to get them engaged. I did want to provide one example of one of these artist grants, so that if this is something you're thinking about doing, this might be a way that you could provide the information to the writer or author or illustrator that's coming to do it. So before my 3rd book, Bees came out, I applied for a community engagement grant through For Culture, which is a county level arts group here in Washington. And I wrote a grant to do a book giveaway there's an educational urban farm and garden in South Seattle in a food desert that I had heard through some random grapevine. They had a new apiary that they were wanting to promote. And so I reached out to them and I was like, well, there's this grant available, like, can we do something cool? Can we partner on this? And they said, sure, we have something called Family Farm Day in July. Would you like to come and you could do story times and maybe like do a book giveaway? And I said, great, let's do that. And so I had no idea how many people would come to it. I wrote in, the purchase of 40 books. And then I also wrote into this grant to do 5 free school visits to schools where at least 40% of students were eligible for free or reduced lunch, because that to me shows that, there's a level of need in the community. And so at the farm that day in July. This is the stack of books that I had. It was gone in about 15 minutes. We did it on a first come, first serve basis. And a lot of the families said that they arrived early because they had seen on social media that there was going to be a book giveaway. And so they showed up like right when the family farm day was about to start because they wanted to be in line to get a free book. And it was funny because actually the organizers were like, wow, there's so many kids here. I think they were actually really surprised by the turnout and the number of kids that came. And I don't think any of us quite knew what the draw was going to be, but families literally lined up early because they wanted to get a free book. And so then just another little unexpected piece of that was through that grant, I had said, I'm going to do these 5 free school visits to schools where there's a high level of need. And at this particular school that I went to, the librarian realized that this was a school where 87% of the kids were receiving free reduced lunch, so high levels of need. She realized she had grant funds that she could spend on books. They were unrestricted. She didn't have to spend them on a specific thing. And she said, hey, can you reach out to your publisher, find out if we could get a discount on this? The publisher was able to offer a 40% discount and free shipping, which for that many boxes of books is not nothing. And she ordered 225 books to give out to every single one of her kindergarten through 2nd grade students. That's what 225 books looks like. This was incredible because this was something I hadn't even planned on when I wrote the grant, but to me, this really speaks to the power of creativity and collaboration, that we were actually able to enhance the original goals of the grant by maximizing the grant dollars that we both had. So the thing that I really try to do is I always try to have fun with my events, because I've found that, adults like to talk about things like grants and all of that. Kids could care less. Like, they just want to have fun reading in the garden. They want to eat spinach out of a weird wagon. My husband and I for a while had a thing called Truck Farm Seattle, where we were one of 25 truck farms across the country, where we had vegetables planted in the bed of a 1972 Ford F-100 pickup truck. And we would just drive it around to different sites, showing kids what food looks like when it grows. And I mean, they just love it. Like, the weirder, the better. So I just try to encourage people to have fun with it, because I honestly believe that food tastes better when you're having fun. So moving on to another arena here, I wanted to talk a little bit about some tasting activities. So because Sylvia's Spinach is considered a tasting book, that is usually the type of activity that I do when I'm using that book. And I've spent a lot of time talking to parents, educators, nutrition advocates about what works. And what we know is it can take a kid 8 to 20 tries before they like a new food. We are programmed from birth to like certain things, right? Like sweet, salty. I don't know if you can be programmed to love butter, but I feel like that's a really easy one. But a lot of foods are more nuanced. And so one of the things I've learned is that you want to start as early as possible to help kids gain an appreciation and a love for more nuanced foods. We know that repeat exposure is incredibly important for developing a taste for something. And I also personally think that gardens are a really powerful tool, not only for the repeat exposure, but also for the wonders of peer pressure, which I can't say enough of when you're working with kids. So for those of you who know the book, you know this page, but I just wanted to share kind of what I do when I do a school visit. So if this is something that you're using in your schools, when we get to this particular page of the book, I actually usually make sure I have a spinach leaf with me. I don't have spinach in my garden right now, but we had lettuce, so I'm having a lettuce leaf today. So when we get to this part of the book, I read it And then I actually eat spinach while I'm reading this. So I go, Sylvia sniffed the spinach. It didn't smell bad. Then Sylvia stuck out her tongue. Licked. It didn't taste bad. So finally, Sylvia opened her mouth and bit that spinach leaf in half. And I always like really ham that part up. And not bad, said a very surprised Sylvia. And like when I'm doing this in schools, the kids will be like, wow, she's eating it. And even doing virtual school visits, when I'm doing that, I see the little squares, like the kids have just been like, what, is she actually eating that? So that's kind of a fun thing to do as you're reading it. And then when the story is over, there's a couple different ways I do it, but I usually just have those like bags or boxes of like a washed organic spinach, and I'll pile it up on a plate, and I have the teachers help me like hand it out. And I ask the kids if they want to participate in a test of bravery with me, and see if they want to do the Sylvia spinach taste test. So I have them, and it's not mandatory. I always tell people, if you don't want to try it, don't try it. No big deal. Don't do it. It's totally optional. And so we'll sniff the spinach, we lick the spinach, and then we crunch the spinach. And then I always make sure to ask for a show of hands for the kids who liked it. It's very important to ask who liked it first, because sometimes kids will like, they'll raise their hands, and then the kid sitting next to them is like, oh, they liked it. And so maybe they'll raise their hand too. And then I ask who didn't like it, which is also an important thing, right? You don't want to just assume that everybody likes it. It's kind of a weird thing to eat a raw spinach leaf. And so I asked the kids, who didn't like it, and they raised some hands. And for me, that's an opportunity to talk about tongues and taste buds. And one of the things I always say is, because kids are always understand the concept of growing. So I say that if you don't like a new food the first time, it might be because your tongue hasn't grown into it yet. And librarians are my most creative sources of inspiration. So this is one librarian at a school I visited who had the kids do the taste test, and then they wrote adjectives down when they tasted the spinach. So like these were some of the things the kids came up with. Good, plain taste, smells okay, cool, awesome, crunchy, and my personal favorite, delicious. And there's been a lot of really cool things that people have come up with. So taste testing the spinach, writing the reviews. I also had a librarian do a green food taste test where she lined up like a bunch of different green foods. So it was like a green smoothie, edamame, seaweed, and then something with spinach. They were all very different tastes and textures. And so the kids talked about that. You can also do raw, cooked, or in a smoothie. And then my absolute favorite thing to do with the book is to either plant or harvest the spinach immediately following the story. So depending on the season that you're in, and what garden you have available to you. Also had one librarian, she planted her own little red wagon in the library after we read it. And so then the kids got to kind of come back and watch the spinach as it got bigger and bigger in the red wagon. She didn't have a garden, so she was like, oh, well, what can I do? And then the rule that Amy mentioned is always the one rule I do for these is don't yuck my yum. So if somebody is enjoying a food, don't tell them that they shouldn't. I will, before I get into Zora zucchini, this smoothie had, this was some AmeriCorps, I shouldn't say kids, they're all in their 20s, but the AmeriCorps workers at a garden found a smoothie recipe that had both zucchini and spinach, which I thought was just like beyond creative. But anyway, Zora Zucchini is much more of a book about building community through food and also avoiding food waste. And so when I use this book, I talk a lot about how 40% of the food in the US is wasted. And they have an incredibly defined sense of right and wrong. They know that this is wrong. And especially if the kid is living in a food insecure household, that number might be absolutely shocking to them. But we know that sometimes shocks are exactly what we need to change our behavior. So the thing I like to do with Zora's Zucchini is a little creative problem solving, where we ask kids what they would do with Zora's problem, where she has more zucchini than her family can eat. She has to get creative with what she does. So I usually have one young entrepreneur will always tell me they want to sell it. Other kids want to donate it to shelters. Kids tell me they want to have a block party and cook it with all their friends. Kids are incredibly creative. And for me, it's an opportunity to talk about creative problem solving when it comes to food. So I had been talking about getting kids to like healthy, fresh food for about 5 years, feeling like I had a pretty good handle on things. And then this happened. I suddenly found myself with 2 adorable little real-time test subjects. And I realized that one of 2 things was about to happen. Either I was going to apply every single thing I had been learning and reading about for years, or the universe was planning some sort of karmic retribution, and my kids were going to be horribly picky eaters. It was going to be some sort of karmic retribution for all the years I talked about picky eaters without actually having kids. So I decided to work really, really hard to have them be great eaters and apply everything I had learned. And so our very early interactions with food were much more recreational than nutritious. But once they started actually eating the food instead of painting themselves and each other with it, they started to have a lot of fun with what they were eating. And in those early months of eating solids, I tried to introduce them to a new food every week. And I also started reading to them during meals. So, a book like Very Hungry Caterpillar, I would be like, oh, we're going to try strawberries for the first time. So let's, eat the strawberry when we get to the part about the caterpillar eating strawberries. We had this is a great little board book that she's a Seattle designer, Sarah Anderson, has vegetables and fruits. And it's very, very simple. It's like the name of the vegetable and then art. And then there's like a couple little things that rhyme. It's kind of a boring book, but like we would get to the part where it was featuring the vegetable we were eating, and the kids would act like it was like a celebrity sighting when we got to that vegetable, like broccoli, we're eating broccoli. They would get super excited. And so books are a way that we continue to get our kids engaged with food. So some of the books that have been really meaningful to us have been Green as a Chili Pepper, Round as a Tortilla. We still quote this book every time we're eating guacamole. My kids right now are obsessed with To Market. And actually we just started going to farmers markets again, which has been really wonderful to do as a family. And right now, to get my kids to eat anything, all I have to say is, ooh, you remember this is fresh from the market. And they're like, oh yeah, it's fresh from the market, and they'll eat it. And this winter, we had a lot of fun with this book, What's Cooking at 10 Garden Street, which is a really sweet book. It's people in different apartments are all cooking meal. They're each cooking a food item to share at a big potluck. And it has recipes on each page as well as a little story. And so we were cooking the recipes from this book. And it was just, it was a really wonderful way to keep them engaged with food even when they weren't eating. Because I believe that eating well is as much a learned skill as reading well. And so I've taken my kids' introductions to foods as seriously as I'll take any element of their education. And one thing I like to say is that teaching taste is a little bit like teaching the alphabet. If we only introduce babies and kids to bland, safe foods, we might as well just be teaching the vowels, and that wouldn't really get us very far. So I really try to encourage people to start with these complex foods. Don't be afraid to fail 7, 8, 19 times, because it helps give kids this library of taste that they can pull from the rest of their lives. The other thing that's really important is experience. And so we've tried to give our kids foods in a variety of interesting settings, like our garden, but also at local farms. And so the thing I love about this picture is my son is sniffing the apple. And we know that smell is one of the senses that is most tied to memory. And so one of my hopes is that for the rest of his life, when he smells an apple, it will remind him of a day spent outdoors with people who adore him. So I also really encourage my kids to play with food, which I know is a little bit harder in a school or a library setting, but trying to create an environment where the kids can get a little experientially messy can really help them have more fun with it. And so now, after 4 years of playing and reading and getting messy with our food, I do now have kids who seek out new and unusual flavors just for fun. And although they might change tomorrow, and they probably will, for right now, I think my little test subjects are having a lot of fun with our experience. So I'm going to just start wrapping up here, because I think we're coming close on time, and I want to make sure that people have time for questions and conversation if we want it. But just really quickly, when I'm talking about what teaching kids taste, I'm talking about food literacy. And as Ben mentioned, this kind of standard definition of food literacy is understanding the impact of your food choices on your health, the environment, and our economy. And I do really like that definition, but for me, it always felt like a little bit too cerebral, a little bit too academic, because for me, I think of food literacy as teaching love, helping kids love good foods. And for me, love is not an academic cerebral emotion. So there's a definition that I really like that I found in the Canadian Journal of Dietetic Practice and Research, which is, we propose a definition of food literacy that includes the positive relationship built through social, cultural, and environmental experiences with food, enabling people to make decisions that support health. And the thing that I like so much about that is, one, it's talking about a positive relationship. Like, we don't want just to teach kids about food. We want to give them a positive relationship with food, and with healthy food in particular. And so much of it is based on experience. I think having those experiences is so important to creating the emotion of love. And I also think this is where books can really come in, because reading a book and then having a positive experience with food creates a memory. And when a child revisits that book, it brings up that memory again and reinforces the positive experience that they had with that food and in that moment. And so that's where I think books can be a really incredible tool when you're talking to kids about healthy eating. So one thing I just like to always say, like, does positive experience make food taste better? I'd love everybody here to just take a minute. Close your eyes if you want to. Please don't fall asleep. I know everybody's exhausted. And think for a minute about the last truly memorable meal that you had, the last truly memorable meal experience you had. And then think about what it was that made it so special. Was it the food? Was it the experience? The surroundings? The company you were in, perhaps? Just think about what made that special. Because I like to share one final story here. This was a farm that I went to in South Seattle. It's about 2 blocks from an elementary school. And these kids, I went to the school, we went to the farm, the kids walk over from the school. We read Sylvia's spinach in the garden, and then the kids harvested their own spinach and they washed it, they made salads with it. And every single kid ate every single bite of that salad. And so one of the things that I like to think about is, like, for the rest of their lives, are these kids going to have a positive emotional experience with this? They had this fun day in the garden with their friends, harvesting, making and eating salad. That's a memory that's never going to go away. We can tell people what is healthy to eat, or we can help them love it by creating positive emotional experiences with healthy food. And the companies that manufacture junk food have got this figured out, right? Like, it's no accident that McDonald's promotes Happy Meals and has playgrounds, because they want people to have a love of their product from an early age. Healthy food advocates don't necessarily have that same marketing budget, but we do have passion, good intentions, and fun on our side. So I'd like to just wrap up today with this quote from the founder of Slow Food. If you want to change the world, don't do it with sadness, do it with joy. I think that fun is an amazing tool to help kids love these great foods from an early age. It has been such a pleasure to talk with you today, and I want to turn it over. If we have any time for questions, I'm happy to answer it or just keep a dialogue going. Thank you so much.